Thank you, Harriet, for the housekeeping, and welcome everyone. Really lovely to see a lot of you coming and attending today, so thank you. Law 365 is the only law firm in the world to cater exclusively to Microsoft partners. We help you with your commercial legal advice and, of course, your employment legal advice, which is why we're here today talking about the menopause. Over to you, Harriet. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kim. Okay. So good morning, everybody. My name is Harriet Hutchinson, and welcome to this Law 365 webinar on the menopause in the workplace. I'm going to launch another poll just to kind of warm you all up. Hopefully everyone is feeling good today. If you just kind of pop a message in the poll that's coming up. Good. So everyone's feeling good. Okay. So hopefully you'll still be feeling good by the end of our webinar. So today, my esteemed panel and I are going to be looking at the subject of the menopause in the workplace, looking at how the menopause affects employees in the work environment, what employers must do to support their staff, what they could do to support their staff, and what risks they face if they ignore issues relating to the menopause. So with me today, I have Meghan O'Hara, our employment partner at Law 365. Hi, Meghan.
Hi, morning. How are you? You're right.
Morning. Good, thank you. Meghan will be our go-to when it comes to the law associated with addressing the needs of individuals experiencing the menopause at work. Meghan is accompanied by CEO and founder of Law 365, Kim Simmonds. Hi, Kim, again.
Hi, hello, everyone. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Kim set up her business 10 years ago, and since then it's been majority female-led. Kim's going to share with us her thoughts on this topic, not only from a legal perspective, but also as a woman in business, an entrepreneur, and as an employer. Joining Law 365, we have Julie Phillips, the People, Culture and Experience Lead from leading Microsoft Partner COEO. Hi, Julie.
Hi.
Hi, great to have you with us. Julie's career has been expansive, covering all things recruitment, employees and HR, and has led her to working for mega employers like American Express and Microsoft. And under Julie's watch, COEO has been ranking highly in the Great Places to Work for medium-sized companies for 2 years now. So great to have you with us, Julie. And then last but not least, we have Louise Otton, Head of People at Infinity Group, to give us her viewpoint from a professional coaching perspective. Hi, Louise.
Hi, morning. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to have you with us. Louise has worked with leaders and teams across a wide network of companies, from banking to professional IT services, helping to improve performance, champion well-being, and create a positive company culture. Okay, so that is all of our introductions. Before we get into the main discussion, I just want to outline what we're hoping to discuss today. So it's going to be threefold. Firstly, what the current problems are and the issues surrounding the menopause in the workplace. Secondly, what the law says. And then thirdly, what are the solutions, or what other options are there out there? So the menopause. Why are we talking about this? Until very recently, this topic was considered taboo, something to talk about in private, and it certainly wasn't something that you would talk about in the workplace. But now, with over 4 million women in work between the ages of 45 to 55, who are likely to be menopausal, perimenopausal, or postmenopausal, this is really something that needs to be spoken about more. A number of celebrities have been speaking out for menopause awareness on multiple continents. We've got the likes of Davina McCall, Oprah Winfrey, Michelle Obama, as well as menopause doctors, including the likes of Dr. Naomi Potter, Dr. Anne Henderson, and Dr. Louise Newson, who are all trying to change the way menopause is treated, both medically and by society. So despite all of this increased awareness, I suppose, many employees still struggle to find support, and employers can still be caught off guard if they don't have the appropriate knowledge or resources. So it's clearly a matter that needs to be addressed by employers in order to retain their experienced and skilled workers and to squash any stigma that still is associated with the M word and its symptoms and treatments. So just I say the M word there, thinking about words, I think back in 2018, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England used the word menopausal to describe the country's sluggish economy. So obviously there was a lot of backlash and criticism at his choice of language. But from that, it's clear that there still is a way to go to take away those negative associations and talk openly about these serious issues. So I guess that's my first question to each of you on the panel. What word would you most associate with the menopause?
I'd say hot flush is the immediate thing that comes to mind.
I think uncontrollable change.
I'd say aging, whether that's correct or not. But yeah.
True.
Anxiety.
No, I think really kind of interesting and different kind of words there. I'm just gonna launch it out to the audience. So if you could just pop down in the word cloud in front of you, what words do you associate with menopause, or what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about the menopause?
Brain fog. Love that one.
Yeah.
Definitely. Major change. Yeah. Female. Yeah. Interesting.
Okay,
Tiredness. Yeah.
Yeah, change. Scary change.
Let's give a couple more moments. Got quite a few responses there. Yeah, kind of along similar lines. A lot of people are all kind of saying the same things there.
Unpredictable. Yeah, lack of control, weight. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of interesting words there, and symptoms in particular, kind of a focus on symptoms there. So just I thought, Louise, sorry to put you on the spot. I think what would be helpful is if you just want to kind of talk about what symptoms people might expect or related to the menopause.
Yeah, I think it's so multifaceted. It's actually amazing when you start reading into it and educating yourself around it. The symptoms can range from anything like we've seen up there, like brain fog, not being able to concentrate. Often the typical symptom of hot flushes isn't something that people experience first. It might be other things that might be happening, like extreme tiredness. Some people experience anxiety that they've never had before. It can be things like headaches, all sorts of weird symptoms like ringing in your ears, dry eyes, low mood, just lack of sort of zest, I think, is often described for some people. And then you have the more physical symptoms like hot sweats and maybe not being able to sleep very well. So I think if you log on to the Menopause Society, there's a list of about 55 symptoms, and they ask women to do a check over a period of time to sort of tick box how many of these symptoms are you experiencing, and then it's difficult to then distinguish, are they menopause symptoms, are they something else? So yeah, education is around it is key, I think.
Thank you. And I think really interesting there in the fact that understanding that there are so many symptoms, and for one person might experience, another person might not, someone might experience the whole lot. So again, really key that as you say, education, that people are aware, because otherwise you might not know what it is, and as an employer then you've not really got an idea. So thinking about some of those key words, turning to the issues. So what are the problems in the workplace? So last year, Channel 4 commissioned a survey for their TV show, Davina McCall, Sex, Myth and the Menopause. That survey found that 10% of menopausal individuals had in fact left their jobs due to the menopause or menopause-related reasons. And that was then also confirmed in a report by the Fawcett Society. So Kim, going to come to you for a question. Today, we've had some great news. Law 365 has been ranked 10th for best workplaces for women in the small business category, which is obviously a really great achievement and a really good nod to kind of behaviours and encouraging females that you are doing in the workplace. So thinking about that and that kind of 10%, what would that mean to your business, or more generally, what would that mean to businesses, that amount of individuals leaving?
Yeah, it's a great question, and definitely something people can't sort of stay blind to. They have to understand what that actually means. I mean, there's sort of three facets to that, right? There's the one which is the cost implication. when you lose a substantial amount of your workforce, you're going to have to replace them. That costs money in terms of recruitment, training, but also the disruption that happens in the culture and the organization as well. So, you know, there's a huge ramification just on your bottom line, if you're looking just at that pure sort of numbers game. I think the second facet for me is reputational damage. So, you know, what is it that's really going on in this business that you've lost such a significant portion of, you know, or demographic of your team? You know, what even men would be quite worried about going into a place that doesn't seem to be nurturing of some sort, you know. I think men are definitely supporting women a lot more. So to have an employer not show that sort of nurturing ability across the board, I think is a red flag for anyone coming in. So that's another kind of facet of it. The other thing is more, I think they lose an opportunity. Women are very creative. They're incredibly efficient. You know, they are there to do the job. They get in when, you know, and they've got a certain time to do the job, and they get it done. I've seen a lot of efficiency come from women. Creativity and nurturing. These are two elements that women hold very close to their hearts and are very good at naturally. I'm not saying, by the way, that men are not. I'm just saying in general, that tends to be what they bring to a culture, what they bring to a business. And actually, when you lose sight of that, what is it that you're actually creating after all of that's gone? So it's really important to hold these things and understand that it's not just about this woman's being grumpy, or this is a really annoying problem, or, you know, men can do the job so much better. It's actually, there's a lot of things that women can bring to the picture. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I think, yeah, really, really interesting perspective way to look at that in kind of a multifaceted way, and no doubt, definitely an inclusivity issue for all businesses. And just another one to kind of follow up on that. What have you done at Law 365 to raise awareness of the menopause?
Yeah, so before I answer that, just a bit of background. So this is going back a few years that we started to really look at this. And this is really before the big sort of menopausal sort of documentaries came out. And I'm very fortunate that I'm part of a leadership group that are predominantly all women, and they're much older than me. And just the strife that these ladies were going through, the sheer amount of anxiety that they felt, and I wasn't going through it at the time. So I actually didn't understand it. And my mother never talked about it. And her mother never talked about it. And actually, women didn't talk about it. And I was like, gosh, this is super frustrating. These are major changes that are happening for women. Why are we not all talking about it? And then I thought, but hang on a second. Why is information just for women? You know, I would want my partner to know about it. I would want my son to know about it. I would want my uncle to know about it, my brother, my, you know, whoever, my dad to know about it, because it affects every part of your life. So my natural inclination was to go, well, this is an educational piece. This is something I have to bring in, not just for me, but for my entire team, both women and men, to really understand what this means. Let's stop this whole, let's not talk about this anymore. We don't know what it is. Oh, that crazy woman over there. Let's actually figure out what this is together, and let's see what we can do. So we invited Dr. Naomi Potter, who's been quite big now on social media, sort of really pushing the agenda for people to understand menopause. We invited her to come in and do a presentation for all of the team, both women and men. And we had a great turnout. It was a fantastic response. People really were armed with information that they needed. But also we created a menopause policy out of that. And that cemented what we actually learnt that day. It cemented what the values and how important this stuff is for us, and how much we value women. And that's really important.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Kim. And yeah, as you say, really important that the educational piece and having those conversations with everyone, because if you don't have those conversations, you're just not going to go. No, things aren't going to change.
Exactly.
So thinking back to that statistic, 10% of individuals leaving the workplace due to, or 10% of menopausal individuals leaving the workplace due to symptoms. Why do we think that is? I'm just going to again ask the audience again, just if you jot down any thoughts you have, why you think menopausal individuals are leaving the jobs. And whilst we wait for a couple of answers, just going to throw it out there to the panel. Why do you think people are leaving the workplace?
I think you lose confidence, don't you? I think that's one of the things, is all some of the symptoms that a lot of women suffer from, with the anxiety and forgetting things and the brain fog, all then have the knock-on effect of having lost confidence and in turn you kind of lose confidence in your ability to do the job you've always done. And I think that's something that's really, really tough and probably is leading to people leaving the job.
Yeah, and I think people don't know they don't then know how to deal with it. They don't know who to go and speak to, even in their own personal lives or medically. They kind of feel at a loss and they feel like something's wrong with them. They often get perhaps misdiagnosed as having depression and anxiety, and yeah, that might well be going on as well. But often it's just a lack of support and knowing what to do, isn't it? And they don't know how to go and help themselves.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, and again, both what you're saying is really reflecting on what everyone there has come back. That it definitely seems to be a loss of confidence, lack of confidence, that seems to be coming up. So moving to look at attitudes towards the menopause, I suppose it is kind of the next step. Is we know that there have obviously been attitudes surrounding the menopause, but do we think that's changing? So, Julie, I'm gonna ask you a question now. Throughout your years of HR experience and working with people, have you seen attitudes change, and how so?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one. In my view, despite it not being written into legislation at the moment, so it's, as menopause, I feel that there is pressure, pressure's being building on this now, and certainly to the government. So I think it's a when and not an if. But what I've seen is employers taking matters into their own hands a bit more, including this as part of perhaps a health and wellbeing strategy, and pretty much like the approach we took at COEO. And also for us, this was with an equity lens as well. So we talked about the importance of inclusion as well. We create fair and equitable working environment for those who experience maybe physical or mental health issues. And this, for me, it's exactly the same. But we know it's a relatively new thing, that we're starting to have more conversations around that. And even in larger organisations, I drove our approach to menopause support with the help of Meghan initially, to set up our policy. I think it was October 21, wasn't it? But as a perimenopausal woman on HRT now, my symptoms were many and they were awful. And I wanted to ensure that women at COEO, or those who partners, husbands, wives, relatives of cis females, also had access to information around the menopause. At the time, there was huge momentum building, as we've talked about, on social media, and more recently on TV as well. So celebrities like Davina McCall, Lisa Snowdon, Sarah Parish, the great British actress, the Menopause Matters movement, doing great work around campaigning around menopause, education, and in the workplace as well. Specialist GPs, we've talked about Dr. Louise Otton already, another one, Dr. Fenella Barton, who's the menopause medic. Great platforms, and really provide great factual content, podcasts all around perimenopause and menopause. So that did really help me, and certainly these are all useful resources that we have used as part of our information that we provide to our employees as well. But whilst you've got all of that great information on those platforms, we know that it's misconstrued to think that everybody knows about it or will be talking about it in all areas of life. And I think the workplace is the final frontier now for that. So there is still work to do in creating an environment where we feel generally comfortable in coming forward, and whether that be to their manager or to HR, or to a colleague, just to say that they're experiencing perimenopause or menopause symptoms, feel like they're supported rather than judged. And we know that 85% of women will experience menopause symptoms. So that's a huge impact on the workplace. So I think there is still work to do. However, there are some positive steps being taken. I like this conversation today. Okay, the information and support and advice provided on here is such a great start to that as well.
Thank you, Julie. And yeah, really great insights. I like that, the final frontier. And again, like as you say, that attitudes have changed, but and again, there is still a way to go. So I think on a similar theme, coming to you, Louise, I just wonder from your insights from a coaching perspective around the attitudes.
Yeah, I think it's definitely getting so much better. I think the thing I've seen over a number of years working with female leaders is seeing people not knowing what to do or where to go or who to talk to now knowing that they've got access to a lot more information. And I think the key is having someone to talk to that understands. So in the workplace, representing yourself as a menopause champion or working in the wellbeing space, knowing that you can open up that conversation, knowing that you can educate people is key. And I think the most sort of easy response to this is to say, this is the way you can go, this is a listening ear, this is someone that understands you, this is the support we can give. And from a coaching point of view, giving people that opportunity to be heard and listened to, because often they don't know what's going on. They don't recognise necessarily that that's what's happening to them. I know, like Julie was saying, from my experience, I didn't know that I was going through the perimenopause early, and I was dealing with all sorts of symptoms that didn't make any sense to me. And it was through access to a GP through our medical health provider that helped me start to think, oh, this is what's happening and this is what I need to do. And that conversation opened up my thinking to going and finding a GP that was relevant and able to help me, and going and talking to my coach and going and talking to friends and other women that have been through it. And just through having those conversations, it broke down so many barriers around the stigma that you think that comes with the menopause. And as well, my mum didn't talk to me about it. I knew nothing about it. In her words, she never went through the menopause. She probably did, but she just didn't know. She didn't have any support. And I've spent the last kind of 2 years really educating myself in this area, so that I can help other female leaders educate themselves. And I'm really passionate, as Kim said at the beginning, about making this something that the whole workforce get educated in. So any guys that are listening into this, you by doing this, you are supporting your mum, your sister, your colleague, your partner, and that's so powerful. The more we can get these conversations across through any format is really important. And from a workplace point of view, I sometimes think people think, oh, it's not relevant to me, I don't need to sign up to this, or I don't need to know about this yet. But actually we do. Like, the sooner we can educate ourselves and our workforce, the better. I even talk to my children about it now, because they see me applying gels and applying my HRT, and they're like, what's that? And I think, isn't that amazing that they know that that's just part of who we are growing up? So yeah, from a coaching point of view, if you've got people in your organisation that can be champions of this and open up the doors to people and provide that kind of safe space to have these conversations, then we're going to do a lot towards helping people stay in the workplace, prevent those women from leaving their jobs, and hopefully feel more supported through a really, really challenging time. So this is a great forum for it.
Great, thanks, Lou. Really appreciate those thoughts. And I think, and you said kind of being seen and heard, and I think that again comes back to a few things that people had kind of commented on earlier on the word cloud. You also obviously touched upon their going through the health plan to access your GP. So I think I'm going to kind of lead off that is as attitudes change, we are seeing more employers starting to implement menopause related initiatives. So whether that is via a health plan or just ensuring there's access. So question for the audience, do you have any menopause initiatives in your workplace? Should be coming up on the screen. If you don't, if you're not aware, then feel free to put that in there as well. And just be interesting to see what people do have. And again, whilst we wait for some answers, just wondered if anyone on the panel wants to comment on initiatives that could be implemented or what they might think.
I think policies are definitely coming up more. I think we're finding, aren't we, Harriet, that we're asked more for menopause policies. Obviously, we've tried to kind of, put that out there as a good thing for employers to have as well. So we've really encouraged it as well. But I think it's people are interested, and we're encouraging it. That's certainly one thing that I think's a good starting point for sure.
I think another one. Oh, sorry. I was going to say another one would be and just reminding people or making people aware that what might already be available to them through maybe their private medical insurance. Some people don't even know that perhaps there is an access to a menopause GP through the cover that they've got, and if that's not there, is that something that companies could think about including as a relatively effective piece of information that people could have access to?
you. I think Lou, you touched earlier on menopause champions, and I think Julie, you are a menopause champion at COEO. So just if either of you wanted to kind of just speak about that just a little bit more.
Yeah, I think, you know, and obviously I took that role on because I initiated our initiative around menopause anyway. So, and it felt right for me to take on that role. But I'd love to have more, to create, you know, a wider safe space. Do you know what I mean? As well, that we have other champions within the business. But you know, you try to create a high trust environment at work, and having a menopause champion role within your business just gives that extra reassurance, focus and support for people to come forward.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Julie. And leading on from that, I suppose the initiative kind of leads us nicely into our next section about what an employer must do. So where does the law feature in all this? So Meghan, I'm gonna come to you for a moment, but obviously everyone else feel free to jump in as well. But firstly, Meghan, what does the law say in relation to the menopause?
The starting point for the menopause is looking at the Equality Act, because that's where the protected characteristics of age, sex, disability, they all come in there, and they're the important kind of characteristics that you look to for the protection as an employee. And then the other side of it is if you've got, because for those you don't need any service. We'll talk about different types of discrimination in a minute, but there's also unfair dismissal is also important protection that's offered for employees there, and that employers need to be aware of, because if the way an employee is treated by their employer amounts to a fundamental breach of contract, then you're looking at, you know, potentially constructive unfair dismissal, or if there's an actual dismissal, we'll talk about a case later on about where there's been an actual dismissal, then you've got unfair dismissal protection if you've got 2 years service. So there's a couple of areas, although, you know, menopause isn't actually a protected characteristic itself, and we'll talk about the government's responses to the WEC report later. There is protection out there, and therefore employers need to be really mindful of that.
Thanks, Meghan. So so you're essentially, there's no specific menopause legislation at the moment, so we're relying quite heavily on the Equality Act.
Yeah.
You obviously touched there upon discrimination or the risks. So just before I ask you the question, I'm going to ask it to the audience what they think the legal or business risks might be for employers. And while that answers comes in, Meghan, if you could just kind of tell us a bit more about the risks employers face if they're not aware.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the key ones, which can be quite surprising, is direct discrimination, because direct discrimination is something you don't necessarily see that regularly, because it's less favourable treatment because of a particular characteristic. So because someone's sex, someone's age, because they're suffering effectively from menopausal symptoms, which then links back to sex and age often. So for example, someone doesn't get a promotion because they're menopausal, suffering from menopause symptoms. That is direct sex discrimination. Age discrimination could be disability discrimination. The case I was just referring to earlier is it's called Merchant versus BT, and it was a successful direct sex discrimination case, and it was quite odd in a way, but the claimant was this part isn't odd. The claimant was suffering from menopausal symptoms. It affected their performance. They moved towards performance management. They were then on a final written warning, and the manager who was managing that performance management decided against company procedure, which said, in this case, if someone's got performance issues, and it might be health related because she had disclosed that she was suffering from the menopause, in this situation, health condition comes up, then go to occupational health, let's get some medical investigations underway. So there was a company procedure which he decided not to follow. Instead, he decided to think, what happened with my wife when she went through the menopause? Oh, this is what happened. And he thought it all through on the basis of what his wife had suffered and how she'd gone through the menopause. And I don't know quite how this linked, but then decided to dismiss the claimant because of her poor performance, even though she was suffering from menopausal symptoms. And the tribunal found that that wouldn't have happened had it been a male person who'd been underperforming for health conditions. That in that scenario, and I think there may have actually been an actual example where that manager did go through medical OH kind of procedure, but he failed to do it with the lady claimant who was suffering from menopausal symptoms. So as a result, it was unlawful sex discrimination and an unfair dismissal for that failure, for his failure to follow the procedure and make that decision. So that, you know, that's a real, you know, important thing to be aware of, that you can't, I mean, Lou touched on it earlier, you can't just guess about, it's so individual, you can't guess what symptoms mean for one person, they're going to mean the same for another, and how it might impact them. It's a very case by case basis, and so it's a very strange thing that manager did. Then there's lots of other types of discrimination, indirect discrimination, where you kind of apply a uniform policy, for example, across everyone, or you have certain kind of sickness policy and you apply it across the board, but it adversely affects women. That's where indirect sex discrimination can come up, or age discrimination for someone who's suffering from the menopause. Another one is harassment, which I think is probably one that comes up, I imagine, quite frequently, because I think people, and harassment in this case is kind of unwanted conduct that creates a humiliating or offensive environment. And I think people think some things are okay to joke about, and don't realise how kind of embarrassing or difficult it may make people feel. And there was a case of A versus Bon Marché, and the manager there kept joking about the lady, but you know, the lady employee there who was menopausal, saying, "Oh, you're a dinosaur," and he did it in front of colleagues, he did it in front of customers, he blamed mistakes she made on her menopause, and that was upheld as direct age discrimination, sex discrimination, and harassment. So she was successful on all of those claims. So again, joking just doesn't really work. It just, you don't know how that person's taking it, so you've got to be super careful. And disability discrimination is another a big one, which I know we're going to talk a little bit more about, but that's another one that comes in a lot.
Can I, sorry, just ask a really quick question on that? Because in terms of compensation, what are we looking at with these kinds of cases?
Yeah, so for that particular one, for example, that had an element of both injury to feelings, and they also had compensation for loss of finances, and they were awarded in total £28,000. So it was, and I don't imagine that there was a massive salary particularly involved in that. So obviously the bigger the salaries get, the side for the financial side can get a lot more kind of worrying. And if someone's got a disability that, you know, if their menopause is meant they have a disability, they might be off work for a long time after they leave a job. So they can really start racking up the compensation that flows from that. So you've got to be super careful.
Yeah, thanks both. And I think as well as you've got the kind of, as I think both of you have touched on, and it's come up as well, the reputational issues that comes from a claim as well. So really a word of warning there to employers that this is an equality issue, and there are legal responsibilities that you do need to be aware of. So I just picking up again, Meghan, on another point, but as I say this on, feel free everybody to kind of jump in, is on reasonable adjustments. You mentioned disability, Meghan. Obviously, reasonable adjustments is a legal duty where someone has a disability falling within the Equality Act. But what about if someone doesn't actually meet the definition of disability, or perhaps, and again, to put it another way, I suppose, you might not want to be labelled as that with your menopausal symptoms. Or so what would you advice would you give to an employer where someone doesn't actually meet the definition? Should they still give reasonable adjustments?
Yeah, I think they should. So the reasonable adjustment kicks in when somebody does have a disability, and then they're at a substantial disadvantage, and you then need to kind of make adjustments to address that disadvantage when compared to people that aren't disabled. So that's where that kicks in. But if someone doesn't quite meet the definition of disability with their menopausal symptoms, then you still want to be flexible. It's good practice, and it, you know, to as we've talked about, it's all about trying to keep, you know, the growing population of working women in jobs, and, you know, for the employer not having that extra cost of having to re-recruit. So the kind of, although it seems like it might be costly in the sense of the adjustments you need to make, you know, someone maybe start later, or, you know, do less days, or, you know, you've got to change uniform policy or whatever, or give more breaks. Although that might seem quite cumbersome, that the kind of end goal is probably pretty worth it. So therefore, yeah, I definitely recommend, regardless of it meeting the definition of disability, to do that.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to throw that one out to the audience. So what reasonable adjustments do you think that could or should be made in the workplace, or what would you like to be seen if you could request of your employer? And whilst those answers come in, just one, I suppose, for Lou, Julie and Kim, really. What sort of things have you had people ask for, or what have you implemented? Any thoughts that you have on perhaps lower cost solutions?
The word air conditioning's just come up on the poll, and that's that's one of the big ones. I think definitely it's harder to put air conditioning on an old building, unfortunately, but lots of fans, lots of, you know, giving them what they need to feel comfortable is really, really important. That's just on a physical level. And I think, and, you know, it's interesting because even as a female employer, so what is it that I need from my team as well? Because sometimes I have brain fog, sometimes I have memory loss. So just that nurturing, that forgiveness, I think, is really important, and that sort of needs to come from both sides. Lou?
Yeah, I think, yeah, building on that, the same thing really. So flexibility, you know, understanding that people might be really, really struggling with things like exhaustion or not be able to concentrate, and being in a noisy environment can be really difficult to manage if you've got brain fog, and your memory's not so good. You might need to be working in a quieter space. You might need to think about adjusting your hours for a period of time. And I think the big thing, which I keep banging on about, is giving them someone to talk to, in whatever capacity you can in your workplace, whether that's, you know, someone internally or encouraging them to go and speak to their GPs, just so they can start to understand what they need to do to help themselves. I think a big piece of this is empowering people to feel that they can own it, and they can help themselves. They can go and get help, and it isn't like the end of the career, and it isn't the end of you know, youth. It is, in fact, you know, it can be the start of an amazing new part of your life. But if you can have the right education around it, then that can make a big difference.
And I think for me, Louisa made a really good point just there, is I didn't want it to, you know, what I was going through, I didn't want it to impact my career. So, and, you know, I didn't have to sit with a fan on my desk, you know, I didn't have those kind of symptoms, and everybody's different. So it's about understanding when people are going through this, it's a case by case, understanding what that person needs. But my experience was, I didn't want it to define me. I didn't want it to, you know, oh, okay, so, you know, I've started this new job and I'm now a lead of my function in an organization. But I didn't want to have to kind of reduce my hours, to take a lesser, you know, not do certain parts of my job because it might impact anxiety. Or I wanted to build my awareness and coping mechanisms, and have, you know, interventions in place that would help me just continue in my career versus have to take some adjustments. So I think there's a level of understanding that not everybody would want to kind of see this as a cutback, as a step back. But actually, how can we enable them to still be successful and thrive in the role that they're doing, but understand more about menopause itself, what they need, and also to help them connect them to the right people to help them as well.
Thanks all. They are really great suggestions, insights there, and kind of similar to what was coming up as well. So empathy seemed to be a big one. So it is having someone to talk to it. And Julie, as you say, what works for someone might not work for another. So the key really is listening to what people want. Just I suppose just very briefly, Meghan, because we have touched on it, but if someone was to bring a claim, if say they asked for adjustments and they weren't made, if that claim was successful, what kind of compensation are they looking? Well, I suppose what are the risks the employer, what financial risks they face?
Yeah, so we touched on with Kim earlier the particular case that ended up in a £28,000 award against the employer. And you can actually get, for a successful discrimination claim, the injury to feelings award part of it can range from £1,000 all the way up to £50,000. So it's, it can be quite, a massive award. And then on top of that, we talked about the financial loss, if the person can't then get another job, if they've been either dismissed or felt they had to leave their job. Can get as far as personal injury as well, for potentially for depression. That could be one of them. And then there's obviously all the normal things, notice pay, and if there's unfair dismissal, basic award, which is the same as redundancy. So it can really start adding up. So it really pays to kind of know what to do, what not to do, and to train your employees properly about the risks.
Yeah, great. Definitely something not to take lightly. With the slight change of gears, again, a one for all of you, I suppose. But Meghan, probably going to come to you first. Is the law changing? Is it going to change?
A little bit. There've been quite a lot of reports recently. As we've all been touching on, there's a lot in the media. Then there's also been government reports, almost kind of on the back of that, in parallel with that, where they reported on obviously the impact of the menopause on the workplace and women leaving the workplace. And obviously the government is generally keen for people to work till about the age of 75, 80, if they possibly can. So that'll include all the women too. So they're looking at ideas, what can we do to kind of help? And they've adopted some of the recommendations from the Women and Equalities Committee, the Menopause and the Workplace report, but some they've rejected. So they didn't like kind of the new protected characteristic of menopause. They said it might create the risk of discrimination towards men suffering from long-term medical conditions. So they thought that wasn't a good idea. They also rejected a few other things, like let's create a model menopause policy to help businesses. And they said, oh no, people have already got policies, menopause policies in place, but actually only a quarter of employers do. So that was again a bit of a weak argument on their part. One of the small steps, I'd say, is they've created a menopause employment champion. So that was one of the recommendations, and it's to drive kind of change in businesses. But the slight disappointment on that, when I looked into it a little bit more, is that it's a lady called Helen Tomlinson, but it's a voluntary role on her part, and she's still doing a full-time job as head of talent with the Adecco group. So she's got to fit in this menopause employment champion alongside her full-time job. But it's better than nothing. And she will try and encourage employers to get menopause policies in place. And they said no. The other disappointing one is they said no to a menopause leave trial that was suggested in a large public sector employer, to see how that kind of panned out. They said no, that will be counterproductive to menopausal women. I didn't quite see how that was, but yeah, so they've done a few things, but not amazing.
Yeah, so a bit of a disappointment, really, kind of on the whole, the outcome of that response, of perhaps a missed opportunity to protect the vast numbers of talented and experienced women leaving the workforce.
Yeah.
Okay, so just moving on to the third aspect, the solutions, and we have briefly touched on this, the kind of adjustments. So we know the issues, we know the law, and we know what employers must do. But what else could they be doing? I suppose not only to mitigate risk, but to create a better workplace, a more positive environment in which menopausal individuals can thrive. So and again, apologies if it's a bit of a repetition, but Julie, just if you could again kind of just explain what measures you've got in place at COEO and what you offer.
Sure, yeah. So I briefly mentioned earlier that we launched our menopause guidance and support policy that Meghan worked on us with in October 21, and we purposely did that to coincide with Menopause Awareness Month. It really encouraged open conversation first and foremost, which I really liked. There is a guidance in there and support and practical help wrapped up in the policy as well. The rest really then, as we've been talking about today, is treated on a case-by-case basis, and we just seek to understand individual circumstances also. The menopause champion role is me. And we've talked about, you know, the reasons we put that into place for that added reassurance. It just means that my role is to make sure we're always up to date on what you know, resources and information and also legislation is available to us on menopause. We've also got a Teams channel. And again, this is accessible to everybody, right? It's not, you know, just exclusive to women. And that's called Menopause Support and Information. So that is everything that you would hopefully want to expect from, you know, what it is, how and where to find out more information and resources. And we will promote this stuff, you know, at those opportunities in the year. So, you know, Menopause Awareness Month and World Menopause Day. We're also implementing mandatory training for, it's an online training that we've got for managers on menopause as well in the workplace. We're also building our women's networking COEO as well. So we're building a strategy for our next financial year. And this will create a great community of females in a tech company, which I think is really important. So there'll be opportunities for development and mentoring for each other, but also this is a group of you know, individuals where we can really promote you know, the gender health resources we have, which obviously include menopause as well. So we'll use the opportunities to ensure that we're feeding that information through that network too.
Yeah, some really great initiatives there. One of the things that we kind of touched upon earlier as well, or Meghan, you might have touched upon, was menopause leave. So again, perhaps either Kim or Louise or Julie, Bank of Ireland has actually recently introduced a policy offering up to 10 days paid leave for those suffering from menopause related symptoms or sickness. And just, do you think that that's feasible from a business point of view? And again, prior to this, we were trying to find out whether that is a kind of 10 days per year, or and does that have to be taken as 2 weeks, or it's not entirely clear. And obviously, Ireland will fall within different jurisdictions. But just from a practical perspective, a business perspective, is that going to be possible or feasible? And then balanced against, I suppose, the cost it would take to replace that employee if they did need to leave.
So I'll just say, from a business perspective, everything needs to be weighed up and balanced, because if you have a very small team and that person is really doing a big job, you know, and there's a lot of other leave opportunities as well with the law and with women as well, that you have got to just balance what's right and fair to both the party and the business. I think this is really, really important. Sometimes we lose sight of that, or the individual will lose complete sight of that. And then, you know, the whole the business doesn't function in the right way, and it's not geared for helping other people and support other people in the team. So there needs to be a balance from both sides. But with that, when you have enough support, when you have an openness and transparency, when you have that empathy and you talk about what you need and you see what you can do with what that person needs, with what the business needs, then there's an opportunity there to both be happy in that arrangement. And I think this is really key. That's just from a very business perspective, because, you know, at the end of the day, businesses still need to run.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we have to be supportive and understanding of people's individual needs. And this doesn't just go to women, it goes to all kinds of individual needs, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Meghan?
Yeah, either anyone else want to comment? I'm just going to launch a poll about whether people think we should, the UK should implement menopause leave. But whilst that's coming in, has anyone else got any views on that?
I also think I've heard this, so around menstruation leave as well. So obviously looking at those times as well. So yeah, I totally agree with Kimberly. There has to be on balance, and I think that you know, even if I use my own personal experience, I went to get help, I sought information, I researched, I listened, I learned, you know, and I took the right course of action for me. So there is an element of responsibility on ourselves if we are going through perimenopause, you know, on the lead up to menopause, or suffering pre or post, that we do take some responsibility in helping ourselves as well. You know, it's not just down to the employer. You know, we have a course of duty of care around all of that, and that's important, but it is down to the individual too to take responsibility.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with
Yeah.
what you both said, really. And I think if you were to do it, then there's, a big piece around creating some guidelines around it and coaching managers on how to manage it and know how to kind of help people make the decisions about what is right for them and what's right for the team, because it is a very personal decision. And like I said, some people will need it and some people wouldn't. And then how do you make that fair across the team? So yeah, I think it's a very tricky one to get right there.
I think from all three of you, what you said has definitely come across in the poll results. So most people have actually said they're not sure whether that. I think that's kind of been reflected in what you've said as well. Of all three of you, that it is a balance and it's weighing up those things.
I'll just say one more thing on that. I think, the law is there to help protect and to try and get us to understand these issues. But if businesses are already doing this stuff, the law doesn't really need to start interjecting. It's when there's a huge amount of businesses that just refuse to look at this stuff, refuse to acknowledge this stuff, that's when the law has to come in. So when you do create a more balanced viewpoint in the business and a more, really emphasizing the balance and the culture there, you can have that impact without needing to, have the law protect or what have you. So it's really important, I think, for businesses to take stock of that.
Yeah, no, really appreciate that. Thanks, Kim. I think conscious of the time, I'm just going to wrap up shortly. Just give kind of a bit of a heads up. I'm just going to do a little conclusion, but then I'll probably come to you and just ask if there's one thing that you would like the audience to take away. But just before I do that, so it's obviously been really fascinating speaking to you all and hearing all your thoughts and experiences. I'm sure everyone listening will really agree that it's been great to get an insight into this topic from all of your different perspectives and hear about the different initiatives that are being implemented. So really thank you very much for that. I think what resonated from me, the three things I suppose the takeaways, and again, I appreciate that could obviously talk about this topic for a lot longer, but the three things, it is an inclusivity issue. So whilst there is increased knowledge on the symptoms and impact on working life, we do still have challenges ahead to kind of stem that loss of talent, which will have a direct impact on diversity in workplaces. And the second thing is in terms of finding solutions, that there are some cost-effective and easy wins for employers. So it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to break the bank. So, for example, a menopause policy. So ensure it's tailored to your environment and culture, leaves room for flexibility. And of course, like all policies, it needs to be rolled out and lived and breathed for people really to get behind it. So it doesn't sit on the shelf. And then I suppose training and menopause champions. I think a lot of the time, possibly issues arise from ignorance rather than malice. So it's a matter of communication and educating your staff and managers and having those conversations. And then the final thing, obviously, I would say this as an employment lawyer, not only best practice to be talking about the menopause and demonstrating your commitment, but taking action will undoubtedly reduce your legal risk in terms of discrimination, which, as we've seen, could be very costly, not only for financially, but reputationally as well. And it could simply just be avoided. So I'm going to come, any of you feel free, I won't pick on you. Just what one thing that you would, or you'd like to take away, or you'd like someone to.
I think raising awareness is really important. It starts with that, and then all the different. I loved all the things that Julie was saying that happens at COEO and the things we've done at Law 365 as well. I think raising awareness is got to be the starting point for me.
Agreed.
It's almost removing that stigma, the barriers. Again, it's a bit like the journey that we've been on, in the world around mental health. Let's just remove the barriers and the stigma around menopause and talk about it.
I think it'd be if anyone's thinking, oh, it's not that relevant for me, I would ask them to ask themselves, do you care about employee engagement? Do you care about creating a good workplace culture? Do you want to have happy employees? And if the answer to that is yes, then this is really important to include in your workplace policies and raising awareness in the workplace around it.
Hey, my final thoughts on that is, if you want very talented women to come in and work with you, you know, how are you going to attract them? They're going to be of a certain age, they're going to need certain things. How are you going to keep them and attract them to you? And that's really important.
Thank you all. Probably going to have to wrap up there because we are conscious of the time. I think it was going to be 45 minutes, but obviously it's a huge topic to talk about. Been great, interesting discussions. But so we won't have any time for questions, but we will be sending out an email after this webinar with the recording link for further information. Just before we do go, we do have a one-time special offer, and just bear with me. So we're offering hopefully you can all see that now, offering a template menopause policy for £150 for 1 week only, which you can then adapt. The reason it's a template, you can then adapt and customize bespoke to your organization, and then set out what initiative or anything else that you do add, you can put in there. So to take advantage of that offer, just drop us an email to hello@law365. And again, the details will be on the email to follow. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much to our lovely panel for their wonderful insights. It's been really inspiring. I'd say just hearing about your stories and perspectives has been so valuable. And thank you all for joining us on this webinar. We really appreciate your interest in this very important topic. And I hope to speak to you soon. Thanks, everyone.